Being Black in America comes with its challenges. However, we understand that enlightenment through education is the oppressor's worst fear. By bridging the gap between academia and the people, our purpose is to equip you with knowledge that breaks down barriers during your journey towards truth and freedom. Welcome to the Black and Highly Dangerous Podcast.
Yeah, Daph, what's up? What's up? How's it going? How's your week been?
My week has actually been a roller coaster. It started off wild with everything happening just in the news, the violence against Black and, Latinx people, the young boy in Chicago. So, it started off as like a roller coaster, but, by the end of the week, I really just tried to focus on like centering myself and getting to a space where, I just felt a little bit better. And part of that was like forward thinking about, the summer and all the awesome plans that I have. And, Tyrell, you probably saw it because I, sent you an email about it. But I'm like, wow, my life in the summer is gonna kind of almost look like my old life a bit. So that was kind of exciting to think about. How about you?
Yeah, definitely. I saw your emails. Like, yep, Daphne is about to get a whole year's worth of traveling in 2 months.
Literally. I didn't even know. Like, it wasn't until like I sat down because I don't even know why I like sat down to do it. I think John and I were just trying to get situated. And I was like, yo, I am traveling almost every week. What is this? So yeah, seeing family. So we're going to see my family, see John's family, my best friend. Since middle school, she's having a baby, so I'm going to host a baby shower for her. I have weddings that have been postponed. I'm in a wedding that has been postponed. So it looks like life is moving forward for a lot of people.
Yeah. I'm not traveling, but I definitely have events lined up, weddings in particular, like you said. I think I got 3 between, July and September or something like that. So that'll be fun. I know my aunt is getting married in July, so that's going to be like a huge family reunion.
Nice.
Everybody's coming up from all around the country. And so that'll be real nice just to see everybody again. Because, it's been a long, tough year. And so, looking forward to, being able just to reconnect and laugh and be with family and friends again, like physically be with them. I think this is something we'll never take for granted again since we've been robbed for that whole year.
Exactly. And I'm just thinking about how emotional it will be because, even at the beginning of the year, we weren't quite sure like when things would turn around, when we would be able to. But things are happening rapidly with the vaccine. And, it's just really exciting.
Mm-hmm. It really is. So it's some good things to look forward to. But similar to you, it's been, with the news, been a lot of wild stuff. That's been exhausting. Winding down to the end of the semester, that's exhausting. I got a couple weeks left, and it's always those last 2-3 weeks. I'm just like, I don't know if I'm gonna make it. But I try to find the will of power through. So to that, I think our last day is like April 30th or something like that. So, me and my students were all trying to power through. So that's looking forward to that immediate kind of win in the 2 or 3 weeks being done with the semester, and then having get into that summer break where we can get some freedom. But like you, to relieve some of the stress, I was like, you know what, let me just start, since I got my first shot, I'm still being safe, but I started going back to the gym this week, started working out again and eating healthy, kind of getting back to my old self after this past year, kind of just being inside and not really working out and just eating whatever. So that felt good this week. I'm like, at the end of the week, I was like, this felt good. I remember why I did this all the time. So it was like a good stress reliever amongst, being tired from the end of the semester, all the news going on, just getting active again. And the weather's being nice and getting some sun has been really refreshing too for me.
Absolutely. One thing you mentioned about just the end of the semester, I have been so tired that I'm like, I know my students tired. So for our last class, I think my last class is on the 26th or something like that. That Monday, whatever that day is, I released the modules a week before, and I decided this week that, they had a lot of reading over the semester, a lot. And sometimes we weren't always able to discuss it in class. So, as a gift to them, it's like, identify one reading that you really wanted to discuss but didn't get enough airtime. Discuss that into your discussion group and write a reflection. So, for their last week, they don't have any new readings. So hopefully, they feel a little bit better, because I know I'm tired myself.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, almost every semester, kind of the last week or two, because I know no one's going to be engaged in readings and doing all that stuff. This is where we kind of do presentations and I allow students to do something similar, where they present on things that stood out to them or most interested them throughout the semester, and they each do like a 10-minute presentation on, because it's just, nobody's, professors and students included, nobody trying to do any extra readings, any extra work. We're just trying to wrap this thing up and head on home. Especially I teach a lot of seniors too, so senioritis kick in, so they already checked out. I'm like, hang in there, y'all, we almost done. So I feel you on that one. So yeah, just looking ahead, I think this is going to be a very bright summer, so I'm sure we'll keep everyone abreast on, all the good things happening with us. And hopefully we start to hear even just collectively more good news for everyone. Because this past week has been wild, but I'm sure we'll talk more in depth about that kind of stuff, more so probably next week when we do our current events episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But all right, let's get into some Oh Lord news. And then after that, we'll introduce today's guest. Hello, and welcome to BHD News, where we give you the most current and eye-opening Oh Lord news of the week. Join us as we present news that'll make you want to say,
Okay, folks, I decided that I would keep it a little bit light this week. So just have a few stories. This is kind of enrich people news. So a family in California bought a multi-million-dollar home in Long Beach, California. The problem is they cannot move into the home because the tenant in the home refuses to vacate.
what in the world? How's that even possible?
Yeah, it's because of the pandemic moratoriums. So they can't evict him. Like, the earliest that they could even try to evict him is July 1st. And then it'll still be like a couple of months of proceedings before they could actually get him out of the house.
Oh, wow. Wow, that sucks. That sucks.
Yeah. Like, what if you bought a home and like the person... Because I don't know whether or not like the lease like has expired and whether he's just kind of on a month to month. It says he has been paying the rent though, but at the same time they're like, I want to move into my home.
Yeah, I'd be tight, because getting a home is no easy task and not cheap. And so when you get it and you sign that dotted line and you got your keys, you definitely want to be going in right away. And now to deal with all this drama because somebody don't want to move out. Yeah, that's a tricky situation. I'll be tight. I don't know how I handle it, but I know I'll be mad, very mad.
Yeah, I would too. Mm-hmm. Okay, so for this next story, a couple of weeks ago, we mentioned some comments by Pete Buttigieg about like mileage taxes and trying to get away from gas. Well, It turns out a lot of states are moving in that direction, and the state of Washington will be the first to ban gas cars in 2030.
Oh, wow. Wow. So they really making the move to be fully, I guess hybrid or electric vehicles.
So what will happen is like people who live in the state can't even import and register new. I think your old vehicles, like, that's fine. But like for a model year 2030 or newer, you can't import it. You can't nothing. Like, nope.
That's interesting. Are they going to be giving folks like some kind of incentive or have enough electric cars in inventory so people could buy it? Like, I mean, that's a strong. I'm sure they'll probably spend the next few years putting that into place. But I mean, those things would have to be in place if you're going to put that kind of law in action.
So, California and Massachusetts, which are considered very progressive states, they also kind of have this in place, but it's like much further down the line, I think closer to like 2035 or something like that. But a California expert said that the upfront cost of an electronic vehicle, should fall to like about the same range as gas powered vehicles by 2026.
Okay.
But that would still require people to buy new vehicles. But I guess if you were going to buy a new vehicle anyway, that's like a model year that's current. I guess you could, just go ahead and afford to get the hybrid. But I hope they're still cute because some of those hybrids,
I know.
I don't like. Why do they have to look like that?
I have no idea. And I think that's the style of them have been turned off for folks. Not having enough like charging stations, as many gas stations have been to turn off for folks. So there's a lot of things. I mean, I think folks would be willing. I'd be willing to get one, but I'm like you. If I'm gonna pay this much money on the car, it got to be definitely something I can enjoy looking at, and I can like fill up or recharge frequently like I can with gas. So that'll be interesting to see. But yeah, I think we're gonna head in that direction. I think. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if every state will do something that way, but I can see states definitely giving you tax credits or tax breaks for having electric cars and stuff like that too, to motivate people doing these kind of things in the future and slowly like transitioning us to be fully in that way. So that has, I think this is something to think about, right? Because I'm not in the process of getting a new car anytime soon, but thinking ahead like that, maybe 4 or 5 years when I do decide to get another one, like, okay, if this is the way everyone's going, maybe I'll look into see what hybrids are out because I don't want to have to like go back and like, not get a new car or something like that. Whatever it is, run into that kind of trouble.
Yeah, I actually, that is what I want to make a gift to myself for my 40th birthday because I plan to pay off my student loans by then. So it's like for my 40th birthday, I want a new car and I'll have to seriously consider whether I get like an electronic vehicle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, one of the reasons that I feel so comfortable, or not so comfortable, but more comfortable traveling this year is because the CDC states that roughly half of U.S. adults have received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. Yes. And I think 82 million have fully vaccinated, that's 82 million have vaccinated with one of the 3 vaccines that are fully vaccinated. So
that's good. That's really good. That does make you feel a little more comfortable out there, especially because we know that even just getting one dose is very effective too. I think after a couple of weeks, 70 to 80% or something like that, which is, I think, higher than the flu vaccine. So I think, I think that's still a good number, even if not everyone goes and gets the second shot. I'm curious, I'm sure data will come on that soon about attrition, how many people don't follow up and get the second shot. That'd be interesting to know too. But that first shot number is great. And it seems like even with the Pfizer shot, they're talking like, hey, they're thinking that people will probably just have to re-up on one shot every year or so. Like to keep it active, which is definitely not bad. I'm sure Moderna will say the same thing eventually as well too. So that's on the up and up. Keep this COVID out of there.
Yeah, it's just like the flu vaccine. And that's what I kind of thought it would probably turn into anyway, because it looks like COVID-19 is here to stay, kind of like the flu. Like, it's just here. So.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so for my last story, I just wanted to highlight a CEO, Dan Price. His company called Gravity Payments in 2015 decided that he would cut his own $1 million salary by 90% to ensure that all of his employees were paid a minimum of $70,000 a year. Now, it's crazy because I saw a news story where at the time, like, they were showing all of these clips from, like, people at different news stations and business people like, oh, that company is going to, like, go down. Like, he's a socialist. Like, they're going to fail. But 6 years later, not only have they like increased their processing, but they also just opened a new office in another state. So the business is expanding with this economic model, and they're even like turning into like a case study at business schools on like what happens when, you treat your employees right.
Yeah, it's fun. It's funny, like you said, to hear the backlash of like, oh, they're gonna fail because he did that. How are you gonna fail because you pay your workers more money? That doesn't make any sense. But that's clearly the capitalists who spew that narrative because they want folks to, say that this is the way things have to work. And I'm in agreement with that. I think that most things will work out if people get paid more money or get more loyalty. People can be, be more comfortable economically. So that's good. I'm glad to see that this model is working and expanding because now other folks can take it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is things I think about too when we talk about like higher ed or just education in general, where they're always talking about budget cuts, where we can get this money from. I'm like, yo, all y'all in admin out here making bank. So if y'all take y'all salary and cut them down a little bit, I'm sure we'll have some extra revenue or things or salaries to spread around to pay professors more, things like that. Because I always find it weird how admin makes so much more money than faculty. I feel like that just shouldn't be the case because faculty are the ones that do a lot of the more important work. I know admin is important too, but talking about educational system, the teachers, need to be very comfortable as well.
Yeah. One thing that he's noted, because I think he does like annual surveys or something like that, his employees started buying homes. They started having children. They started saving, like all the things that you would want people to do. And, I think about, like you just mentioned, higher education with the number of adjuncts who are living precariously, on food. It's like we do not have to mirror like the corporate world, which I think higher education is doing increasingly. Like I remember when we got the new president at Purdue and we were all like, oh no, as they were trying to like cut things. And, I just hope we can move to a world where people are paid fairly, to where the CEO doesn't have to make like 1,000 times more than the lowest paid employee, and like close that gap a little bit more.
Yep, that's how it should be. Hopefully, stories like this get us in that direction.
Yep. But those are my stories. I hope they brought a smile to some people's faces, because I'm pretty sure we have all been going through it.
All right, I got a couple stories worth mentioning. One, I'm sure this is kind of definitely old Lord news, but it's a bill that was passed, of course, in the state of Florida. Florida House passed a bill on April 14th that would ban trans girls and women from playing on high school and collegiate teams.
Yeah.
But one of the crazy things about this bill is that it will also allow schools to require a genital inspection of student athletes suspected of being trans. That is wild.
I saw that and I was just like, that is so disgusting. Like, that is outrageous. Like, I feel like Ron DeSantis and like all those sort of people, they're just trying to see how ridiculous and outrageous and predatory and discriminatory that they can be. Like, that's what it feels like is happening in Florida right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's just wild. Florida is always wild with their politics and how, they're really pushing the envelope, seeing how far they can take this thing and how much they can get away with. But doing stuff like that is like you said, it's disgusting. And that's just the best word choice for it at the moment. And this trans group or LGBTQ group, advocacy groups have been keeping track of bills, I believe, since 2015. And they said that in 2021, this is the record-breaking year for a record-breaking number of anti-transgender legislation. About 117 legislation bills have been introduced, where the highest before that was only 66, and that was in 2020. So that's something to keep our eye on too. Like, what is going on here? Why are all these states pushing anti-transgender legislation? Especially, we are blue, at least in the executive office and below, and how these things are just moving forward in this regard is kind of alarming.
Exactly. For our listeners, if you want to learn more about like, transgender issues, why it is so important that we protect our trans brothers and sisters. We do have a couple episodes on that we can link in the comments. We interview Diamond Styles, a trans activist, about the issues and why this is just so tragic. And we have to speak out and step up on behalf of our trans brothers and sisters.
Definitely check that episode out because it was definitely eye-opening. We learned a lot, and it kind of motivates you to pay attention to these things a bit more and definitely speak out against it. So just wanted to raise awareness on that. What Daph and I mentioned in the beginning, it's been a wild, couple of weeks with all these kind of shootings. I know, recently we saw the one in Chicago with police, but we saw another mass shooting in Indianapolis at the FedEx facility by a disgruntled worker. And they're saying that so far the U.S. has reported at least 45 mass shootings in the last 30 days alone. So part of it I think is because folks are COVID, like we said, all the good things we're looking forward to. But again, folks are interacting or outside again. And for some reason, we're just seeing this uptick of violence that we really haven't seen as much of in this past year, I guess, because people have been inside. But we're also usually used to seeing it a bit more spread out. And now it's happening almost every few days. So, as we all are getting outside and seeing loved ones, let's be very careful because it's getting wild out here in these streets.
Agreed. Now, I will say, although, I guess I'm turning this into like clapback summer or hot girl summer, whatever you want to call it, I am staying very close to, home in the sense that, yes, I'm visiting family, but we're not about to be out here because things are still crazy, not just with COVID-19, but with people who are taking you think about the January 6th insurrection. A lot of those people are still out there and still angry, and not saying that, those have been all the people over the last, few shootings. I don't know the details of them all, but just know that there are angry people out there and you need to watch out for yourself. So I'm going to keep it close to home with all of this traveling, with my friends and my family, because you just don't know.
Yeah. You're definitely not going to find me at any big, events or festivals or stuff like that no time soon. But yeah, just seeing family and keeping it intimate and small, I think is the best course of action at the moment until, I don't know if things will forever figure this out, but at least until things simmer down and it's safer, because it doesn't seem that safe right now for COVID and for this violence reasons. And my final story, I think this is worth mentioning because we've had discussions about this before. And in a historic vote, a House panel advances the bill to study reparations. The House committee this past Wednesday advanced a bill that would create a commission to study reparations for descendants of enslaved Americans, which is something that has been pushed for a while. And now I think we are making movement to see what we can do. Now, it says that this legislation has a very little chance of becoming a law, even if the bill is scheduled for a floor vote, because it faces a lot of opposition from Democrats and Republicans. So this is not something that both parties are in agreement with doing, which is sad to see, but we are moving in the right direction and hopefully it can gain some traction.
Yeah, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think one more story really quick along the same vein. There was a story I was reading about where they were talking about D.C. being possibly becoming the 51st state. I think this was important because they are pushing for them to become a state because they don't have any votes or representation in Congress. And D.C. has about 700,000 residents, which I believe is more than Utah and Wyoming or something like that. And they each have 6 members of Congress. And so they're pushing for that because DC is also, I think, majority non-white state, or will be a state if everything passes. So they are moving in that direction. I think it's moving up the chain to Congress now. And I believe they're saying, most Democrats are in favor of this largely because that would give them more seats in the Congress and probably in the Senate as well. But if they're a state, you get 2 senators. And they're saying this is going to be a very tough battle because they're going to get a whole lot of Republican backlash. But it's something to keep in mind. Let's see if DC becomes a state, something that I support. Definitely those people should have a political voice and not be excluded from these important discussions. Mm-hmm. And I think it can be a very, interesting thing if it does happen, like I said, and giving us some more blue seats in the House of Representatives and the Senate.
Absolutely. It's crazy because in arguing against it, some people made the claim that they don't need representatives because representatives have to drive into DC and see what's happening. So that's no, absolutely not. Because I drive through the city or the district, whatever you want to call it, that means I have representation because they see, somebody said they see, the little signs in the yard. So that's representation. I'm you done lost your mind.
Yeah, that's wild. That's wild. So that's definitely something we need to keep an eye on because I'm all here for it. Let's get more Black people, get some more voices and power in our politics. So
yeah,
we'll see.
I was about to say there's also, potential conversations that, people want Puerto Rico to be a state rather than a territory. So that's a conversation that's also happening.
Yeah, I agree. Make both of them states, and that'll definitely throw the Senate and the Senate in our direction for sure.
Yeah,
Republicans have to make us some ground. It'll be way more competitive. At least it won't be such a how sometimes Republicans get so many different seats, but it'll even it out. So I'm for it, but I can see why they're going to push back because these are definitely minority states. I mean, would be states. So, and folks, they don't like anything like that when it's Black people having a voice. So, exactly. But it's worth mentioning. But okay, that was all good. Let's introduce today's guest, Dr. Shelley Eversley, an associate professor of English at Baruch College at CUNY. And she joins us today to talk about, some of her work and research on literature and feminism and Black studies. But more importantly, we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion and equity and inclusion within higher education.
Yeah. Another thing that we talk about is her website, which is a multimodal encyclopedia called Equality Archive. And it focuses on, the history of sex and gender equality in the United States. So in addition to talking about those issues in higher education and, authenticity within the Black experience, we also talk about this really awesome resource that she helped to cultivate.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's a really good resource. And again, we're all about, we do it here. So we always love to have other folks on who are using this, using platforms to, make education free and public and accessible. And so she's definitely a proponent of that. So without further ado, let's get Dr. Eversley on and we'll catch up with y'all later. For today's episode, we welcome Dr. Shelley Eversley, an associate professor of English at Baruch College, City University of New York, whose teaching and research focus on literature, feminism, and Black studies. During the conversation, we discuss the challenges of being Black in the academy, as well as pressing issues related to equity and inclusion within higher education. We also have a conversation about her work on Black authenticity and her motivation for founding EqualityArchive.com, a multimodal encyclopedia of the history of sex and gender equality in the United States. Welcome, Dr. Eversley.
Hi, how are you? I'm great.
Doing great. We're excited to have you on and kind of talk about the work you do and all the wonderful work you're doing in the higher education settings, et cetera. And then also, of course, we want to talk to you about EqualityArchive.com, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But before we get all to that great stuff, we just want to give you a moment to tell our listeners a little bit about who you are.
Okay, who am I? I am a person who loves being Black, who loves Black people, who loves teaching Black studies, who grew up in a Black city, Baltimore, who was born at a Black hospital in Chicago, Bethany Brethren Hospital on the West Side. And I am currently interim chair of Black and Latino studies at Baruch College. And so I am also in the moment just rebuilding and helping to energize a new major and a curriculum for the 21st century.
I love said, like, so you definitely fit Black and Highly Dangerous podcast. Anyone who is so, in love with their Blackness, we love it here, especially academics, because it can be really hard to navigate these institutions when you are Blackity Black, y'all. But, we want to actually know a little bit more about your journey to becoming a researcher, to the academy, and, what led to your interest in literature, feminism, and Black studies.
Okay, well, I went to fancy colleges, expensive ones, and graduate school. And in both places, I never had a Black woman professor. So I really had to sort of imagine it. There are a couple of Black women professors who were in my orbit. That is, when I was in undergrad at Columbia, I also had to work a lot. And so all I really did at Columbia was go to class. And some classes I couldn't take because they would meet at 4:00 and I had to be at work at 4:00. I worked in bars my whole life. And so I had a professor, her name was Priscilla Wald, a white woman who was great to me, a great mentor to me. And she supervised an undergraduate research project on Zora Neale Hurston. I was obsessed with the characteristics of Negro expression when I was an undergrad. And I was obsessed with the story of Zora Neale Hurston, partly because she and I sort of moved in some of the same locations in our lifetimes. And I went to the Beinecke archive and I read her manuscripts and I was hooked. I saw her postcard to Langston Hughes from Jamaica, and she signed it with this giant, enormous, flourished Z. And I was like, that's it. I'm done. I'm going to be a professor. I also thought that professors were, rich. I thought that professors, they just kind of work 2 days a week and they had the summers off, and that they could live in books and teach, one class that had a very small, smart, eager group of people. So that was new. A realization. And then I went to grad school and at Johns Hopkins in English. And when I got there, there was one Black person in the program. I'm not sure what happened to him. I'm from Baltimore, so I was surrounded by my community of friends and family. But it was very lonely at Johns Hopkins. Yeah, it was really lonely and hard. But, I made it. I got through and I got some mentoring, and I reached out to and sort of stalked a few people when I was in graduate school. I stalked Mary Helen Washington. She was at the University of Maryland. She still is. I stalked Hortense Spillers. I literally walked into an elevator at a conference and she was there and I was starstruck. She is, as you know, an incredibly statuesque Black woman with short hair, as I am a Black woman with short hair. And I saw her and her fashion and her persona in an elevator. And I was like, I need to meet you. And I literally just met her, introduced myself to her, and she was really kind to me. And so I could start to imagine what I could be like by stalking these women in real life, and obviously through books.
Yeah, I think that's important, just hearing your story and then understanding the importance of visibility, representation, right? Even you being a graduate student, and just for, younger generations in general, just being able to see themselves in certain positions and atmospheres, I think does a lot and is always inspiring and personally motivating, right? When we can even access those folks and touch them and see them and talk to them. I think that's always important. It's something that I always try to keep in the back of my mind as I even navigate my own species, of just being accessible to folks in my community in particular. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I have to say, I got through a very competitive, rigorous, lonely graduate school experience because literally, I used to leave some classes and not want them to see me cry. And one time I made it to class, out of class, I should say, without them seeing me cry. And I got in my car, which I couldn't afford. I got in my car and I just started crying. And another white person tapped on my glass, and he got in my car. And that was someone who was finishing the program. And he said to me, he's like, you know what, don't let these, in grad school when they start doing critical theory and quoting it in French or quoting the original German just to make you feel bad. That's how I went to grad school. But my grandmother, who is gone now, used to pray for me. And I was never a person who was particularly religious, but I grew up with a religious family. And I used to go see my grandmother all the time after class, all the time. And she would refer to my dissertation as my book. And she would pray for me, and I got through. So yeah, community is important. Even your grandmother who didn't finish high school can motivate you to become whatever you imagine. And for me anyway, becoming a professor was a lot of imagination.
Absolutely. I think about being, in my early 30s and still having my dad, kind of motivate me, send me texts to like burn the midnight oil. You can do it. You can do it. So, having that community and those sources of support is, important.
I didn't think you were going to ask me that. I didn't think I was going to go there, actually. So, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. But I guess moving more into your work, a theme is, authenticity, practicing Blackness and what it means to do that in our contemporary time. And so, why is it important to explore this area?
Okay, well, I would separate the two, first of all. When I first wrote about authenticity, I still feel this way, but in the book, The Real Negro, I was much younger, and maybe some of my thinking has evolved, but I still hold to that argument. And that I was really questioning the very idea of racial authenticity. I was distrustful of it. I was distrustful of it because I'm one of those people who was always a nerd and always challenged. In a lot of my life, I was challenged for not being Black enough because I was a nerd, because of my diction, because of some choices that I may have made. But I was always Black. And I was curious to see how Blackness became some kind of authentic sign inside of the literature. So with Paul Laurence Dunbar, for instance, William Dean Howells wrote, "Oh, he's a Negro. Look, he's a Negro. He's the real thing." When they saw this picture of a dark-skinned man writing poems in contrived Negro dialect, they thought that artifice, the art, the craft that he wrote those poems in was somehow proof of his Blackness and not of his creativity. And I was really struck by that. And so I kind of dug deeper. Gwendolyn Brooks, when she won the first Pulitzer Prize ever for a Black poet, people talked about her poetry, her modernist poetry, as if it wasn't Black enough. And I was curious to see why and how people were measuring real or authentic Blackness in a text. And so I think now, when we talk about authenticity, we're talking about being true to yourself. And that truth is a complex one. When we're talking about authenticity in literature or in art, sometimes we just impose a very flat idea of what Blackness is and what Black people and what Black creativity looks like. So that's one thing. On the other side, the practice of Blackness to me is even not just being Black, it's also a freedom practice. It's about resistance. It's about recognizing the undercommons, the fugivity of the kinds of anti-Black social control. And I'm really interested in that as a freedom practice. I'm really interested in talking about Blackness, especially at the middle of the 20th century and that moment of integration. I'm interested in Blackness as a practice, as an action, as a thing that symbolizes resistance and freedom and emancipation from social control.
I guess a follow-up question I have to that is kind of, I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer it. Maybe you can, where in that spectrum of reasoning do you think that, respectability politics kind of falls in that era of your analysis?
Can you say more about that question? Where do you think?
Just, we talk about in the Black community, especially kind of the performance aspect or the ability for us to perform in a certain way, right? So that we can excel or progress in society, the way we dress, the way we speak and dialogue. And I know in one aspect, it seems like your analysis was looking, especially originally from like an intragroup experience, right? How Blacks treat each other and and interact with one another. But then on the other end, when we're talking about sometimes we perform in certain ways, whether performing Blackness within, but also when we're doing without, in order to make white folks more comfortable, right? In that kind of spectrum, I guess, in overall Black behavior or performance. And I was just wondering if you ever thought about that when you were doing some of your analysis or thinking about these kind of concepts.
Yeah, I think that, thank you for that clarification. Obviously, respectability politics, at least for me, I think respectability politics limits a person's freedom, limits a person's, as I will say now, limits a person's ability to practice Blackness, to practice freedom, in that it's self-censoring. And I write about censorship and surveillance as a form of social control, and respectability politics functions as censorship. If a Black person is worried that their speech or their cousin who might be living outside the law is somehow going to undermine the respectability of Blackness or the family, then that's a problem.
Absolutely. Shifting gears a little bit. At the, university level, you've done a lot of work around equity and inclusion. What would you say are some of the pressing issues you've noticed concerning equity inclusion in higher ed?
I can go on for days, and I don't know how dangerous you want me to be. Well, let's talk about, people talk about leadership from the top, right? I mean, policy is determined by budgets, and budgets are usually managed by provosts, deans, presidents. And if we're talking about equity in higher education, then we should look at the number of Black people, Latinx people, women who are provosts. And if we stop there just for a second and think about what a provost needs to be, which is a full professor at a relatively early stage in her career, so that she can then develop leadership skills, institutional leadership skills that would make you a provost, then we can already see how few provosts, how much, leadership is problematically and deeply problematically white and male and short-sighted. And so if I'm thinking about equity and solutions to creating equity in higher education, I wouldn't just say, oh, we need to hire more Black and Latinx faculty. We do need to hire more Black and Latinx faculty in all areas, not just in Black and Latino studies, et cetera, right? We do need to have more Black graduate students successfully defend a dissertation and get tenure track jobs. We need that. We do need to retain faculty. We do need to support faculty, especially the faculty that are working overtime on committees and mentoring, in addition to teaching and research. But I'm really struck by the way in which we get stuck at the associate professor level, if we're lucky enough to get tenure or a tenure track job. And I'm really stuck by the way that there's so few Black people who meet the minimum of being considered to be a provost, which is the highest ranking academic officer at any college or university. And so if I was going to talk about equity and justice in higher education, I would look at that tenure and promotion process really hard and think about how the gatekeepers are making sure in some way, whether it's undermining a person's confidence, creating a bitter assistant professor, so by the time she becomes an associate professor, she doesn't want to come to campus unless she has to, or the leadership training programs that don't seek out and encourage Black people to pursue higher ed management, or even full professor status or distinguished professor status. These things are what I talk about. And also the STAR system, because, we hear all the time about, the very famous Black intellectuals, who I will not name, right? The very famous Black intellectuals who are very productive and, point us to the superstar system. But how many graduate assistants do they have to write those books? I know at Baruch College, I have none. I know at Baruch College, I am teaching 2 classes. I am running a department. I am directing a program, and I am sitting on every committee I can possibly sit on to help ensure that my younger colleagues get tenured and promoted. So my writing gets slowed down. And certainly the support for research isn't there. And most of us are teaching at poor universities that have the diverse student populations that deserve to have professors who can give them the most cutting edge research and knowledge. So yeah, I could go on if you want me to, but I don't know what direction you'd like to go with this conversation. But I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I spent a lot of time trying to change it.
That's compelling in a lot of ways. One, on a personal note, because I know you're CUNY, I'm at SUNY. And I think there's some overlap. I think we're talking about the student populations and kind of what we may experience. But also I'm on the cusp of getting tenure. It's my tenure year, I'm up. And so I should be an associate professor, hopefully, by the summer, knock on wood. And that's something I've been wrestling with too, is like, I think how you even share your experiences, I think being Black in graduate school, and then also, getting a tenure track position, and then like, okay, you finally get tenure, associate professor. And then it's like, do I have the energy, the time, the motivation to keep pushing forward to that full professor? It's kind of like, I want to break. I want to relax. I kind of want to just chill, because it's taken so much of me to get to this very point. Now that I'm here, I understand that full professor is a goal that many aspire, but I think it's also about that just personal motivation. I'm still trying to figure out, do I have it? Am I ready for that extra push, or am I going to kind of relax a little bit? So I feel that what you were just talking about, for sure.
You have it. I'm going up for full right now. So like you, we're on the cusp of something else. And if we are going to get back to the practice of Blackness, that practice of freedom, then, we need to make sure that we have seats at the table. And, if my ancestors and your ancestors could have walked to freedom, then we can walk to full professorship, and hopefully do it a little faster. You will do it a little faster than I did. I sort of got distracted. I didn't get distracted, but, my journey was in a straight line. It wasn't linear at all in terms of where I am in my career as a Black professor. But I wouldn't change it. After I got to be tenured and promoted to the rank of associate professor, I then became a mentor formally in a faculty mentoring program that's at CUNY that I'm really proud of. And that program, I gave my heart and space and brain space to that. And it slowed me down, sitting on committees and running searches and making sure that those search committees didn't just hire, the same old person that looks just like the rest of them. Was exhausting, but I did it. And I would do it again.
What you just mentioned is really important. I was actually, recently looking at some tweets, and I noticed that, one professor mentioned how, they were dropping a bunch of committee work because of, the extent to which it prevented them from, doing certain things to advance themselves. And I think that is a big tension that academics, particularly Black academics and, other academics of color have, like the tension between trying to move yourself forward, but also wanting to reach back and like bring other folks with you. And that burden that maybe white professors or those from other, privileged backgrounds may not have.
Yeah.
And so I guess, in thinking about that in particular, like, how do we address like that issue in particular? I guess what can institutions do to not only support the work of, increasing, the pipeline, but also support scholars who are doing this extra work that may or may not count for tenure or promotion?
Well, two things. On one hand, when you get to be a full professor and you get to sit on executive councils and the dean's councils and et cetera, then you get to shape the standards for tenure and promotion. And, this is something that nobody ever tells you when you're going up for tenure or promotion. They don't tell you that the standards are sliding. I looked up a whole bunch of full professors who would potentially be my peers. And, they don't have as much publications as I have, but what they have is the arrogance to believe that they have enough. I should say, sometimes it's the confidence to believe that they have enough, and sometimes it's the arrogance. And I think that the terms of tenure and promotion should change. And I think that when we have a chance to actually engage those conversations, we can actually call out the discrepancies and start valuing things like, we call it service, right? And I hope, Tyrell, if you still have time to look at your candidate statement for a promotion, use the word institutional leadership instead of service. And what I do in my work, and what I think we all need to do, is we need to talk about the work that we do, the sort of invisible, thankless work that we do, and rename it as institutional leadership, and talk about it as institutional leadership that's so critical to retention and success, not just of students, but of faculty and of the reputation of the college or university that you're working at. Next, I would say, when all these people are tweeting that you should say no to committees sometimes, I think that's good advice. There are times when, I didn't show up on campus except to teach because I needed a break and I couldn't afford, the partial salary that comes with, sabbatical at my school. And just took a break. I use vacations to take a break. And I think we have to give ourselves the room to do that. It's also a practice of Blackness, a practice of freedom. And then other times we just have to remember the stamina of our ancestors and of ourselves. I mean, I'm sure that neither of you, breezed through graduate school. It was hard and horrible, but you did it and you got through. And I think that sometimes it's worth just remembering that.
Absolutely. I'm recently out of graduate school within the last year. So yes, those feelings are fairly fresh. But yeah, we did make it through.
You did. And take a break and congratulate yourself. These are the things that, you have to do for yourself. When you look around at your colleagues who are not Black, and you see them so arrogant and confident, or seemingly arrogant and confident in themselves, and you're like, wait a minute. You had all this help, and all these institutions, appreciate the way you talk. What about me? And this is the moment where you have to kind of turn into yourself and affirm yourself and find the people who affirm you. And at the same time, find mentors and colleagues who are standing at the gate and tell them you need them to open the door. I think that's something that, we, especially in the academy, we're taught not to ask for things. You know what I mean? We're taught not to say, well, you know what? I really want to be on that committee. Can you help me get on it? Or I would really like you to introduce me to your editor at that fancy university press. I'd like to know how you did it. Like I just found out that so many of the people, the critics that I love and respect their work, many academics, these are the senior fancy ones, they have development editors. Did you know that?
Yes. That when you mentioned earlier, like the help that people get, I was thinking about all of the invisible labor that goes into allowing, scholars at certain schools to excel. And because people do not know about that invisible labor, they're asking what's wrong with me. Like I know for a fact that certain universities pay for their professors to have au pairs, to have live-in help. There are a lot of benefits that people do not know about. Yes. And I found out about a developmental editor. And even like when I graduated, I was like, I just want to know, what I need to do to turn this dissertation into a book. And I got a book review through a developmental editor, but it was only because I knew about that. And I've tried to spread the word to other people, but yeah.
It's interesting because developmental editors used to very often work for those fancy presses, and those fancy presses budgets were cut or restricted. And so these development editors get fed authors from presses, and they get paid thousands of dollars to reorganize and shape your book. All this time, I mean, I'm hopefully about to become a full professor. I never knew, but I spent my career at public universities where there's no research budget. I'm always surprised by the way in which we can't see. I mean, how many times when you think of the Black intellectual superstar from a public university, I mean, just weigh it up. And that has to do with the research budget that comes with those fancy private universities that make it so that fancy private university faculty can pay research assistants, development editors, indexers. These are not things that we can afford at CUNY, maybe not at SUNY. At CUNY, we think y'all at SUNY, by the way, are rich. So,
Far from it.
We think y'all are rich.
I wish that was the case.
But, it's an interesting thing. And every time I find myself released from a class, my 3-3 teaching load, and I get one course release, it's because I'm doing some other work, not because I am going to now focus on writing. And it's not as if, a couple of years ago, I was going to go to present at the ASA, American Studies Association in Atlanta. My paper is accepted. With the ASA, you have to pay, you have to register, you have to be a member before you can submit your abstract. And that membership at the time was $200. It was $200 because I deflated my income because I had $200 to give them. I couldn't give them $250 or whatever they really wanted. I paid my $200. My paper was accepted. And then I went to my college for money to go. My college gave me $200. So the registration for ASA was $250. I was already out $200. I had to pay $250 to register, and then I had to fly or drive or get my butt to Atlanta from New York, and then spend a day or two in a hotel. And I couldn't do it. And it was really embarrassing to have to write that committee to say I can't come because I can't afford it. And then they write back, "Oh, that's so terrible. You should apply for the special money for poor people to go to ASA." And then I was like, "Really? How deep is that application process?" And that is also time. That is also a distraction from work. So yeah, I have lots to say about that. Would I go teach at a private university right now? No, because I'm committed to the people that I teach, the students. And I worked out a life for myself where I am with my colleagues and my family and my home. but there's a trade-off for that. And I'm not going to get bitter about it. I did, we go through those phases where we can be bitter about it, but I hold on to the mission, and that keeps me going. My commitment to doing this work isn't just about being famous, or hanging out with fancy artists and writers. I'd love to. I know some, but it's about the work. It's about creating knowledge and creating legacies of knowledge, so that the future doesn't look like the past.
For sure. Let's talk about an additional hat you wear amongst all the hats you wear within the academy. It's something you've been kind of doing, which I view as, a form of public scholarship, or helping folks get readily accessible or free accessible information that is usually sometimes confined to the walls of higher ed. And that is your work as the founder of the equalityarchive.com. So can you tell us a little bit about this and your motivation for establishing it?
Yeah. I edited a special issue of Women's Studies Quarterly on the 1970s. And Women's Studies Quarterly is the oldest feminist journal that's still practicing. And the feminist practice at Women's Studies Quarterly is that two editors work together. And that is something that I've embraced, collaboration, kind of like the two of you, right? We're better when we have a collaborator. And so I was collaborating with this Chicana feminist named Michelle Habel-Playan. And Women's Studies Quarterly does this classics revisited. And so we were doing this issue, and this 1970s issue, by the way, we quietly made sure that every contributor is a woman of color. We never said it out loud. And it's kind of like my little project since then. Every time I edit a book, I just go find contributors that are people of color. I'm doing one now for Cambridge on the 1960s in African American literature, and every contributor will now have Cambridge University Press as a line on her CV, and that contributor is a person of color. But so we were doing the Classics Revisited, and I looked at the Equal Rights Amendment, and I was really surprised at how brief it was, and that I did not know the history of gender inequality in the United States, the way it's been institutionalized in the Constitution, or I should say, the lack of acknowledging Black or any woman's rights in the Constitution still does not exist. Right. So women in the United States can't really sue. There's all kinds of like Band-Aids, acts and agreements, but it's not a constitutional right in the United States of America for a woman to not be discriminated against based on her gender. It's not there. And I was really surprised as a feminist that I hadn't fully understood the implications of that. So, I created Equality Archive. I was curious about open education resources. I was curious about the emergence of all these like textbooks and supposedly online resources that had all these paywalls. And I wanted to do something about it. And so I called a bunch of people and asked them to create these entries that included reliable information, with multimedia, so you can see video that's all available on the internet, but sourced, sort of like a peer review digital platform. It also, every entry inside of Equality Archive also contains links to get involved, equality activist organizations, and then resources for more reading and research, because I know that most of our students don't go to the library when they're looking for information. They use a search engine, a public, popular search engine. And so we need to make sure that they can find what they need when they're just surfing the net. So that was my goal. I wish I had funding, because it needs to be expanded. There's so many articles and entries missing. We created it. I connected with this great graduate student who literally helped me build it and make sure that we could see in a sort of digital space, how intersectionality and how the layers of feminist action work. So you can see that sort of crossed and overlapping in the clouds at the margins of Equality Archive. And it was a really fun project, and it's probably the most important thing I've ever done. And that's the thing that sort of changed me in the academy, because I got more attention for that than any article I've ever written, any book I've ever written, more invitations to give lectures than anything I've ever done. And that just goes to show us that the academy is changing, and it can change if we change it, if we create these opportunities and these archives of knowledge that don't fit inside of the sort of old dinosaur academic press. We might actually be able to create an impact and change the system.
That's really important. And it's actually something that I have been thinking about as, the academy is changing, the job market is shrinking, and there are so many potential scholars who will be without an affiliation, and, they will lack potentially library access. And so how do we get them this information? So I love Equality Archive. And, I know you mentioned that you wish there was, you had funding and stuff. So, can you just share like how people can contribute, how people can help you to continue this mission?
They can tweet at me, Shelley Eversley. They can write me. They can actually click the contact from Equality Archive. It's interesting that I get people trying to sell me stuff for Equality Archive. Equality Archive does not track visitors, which means that, there's no surveillance coming from our end on Equality Archive. So anybody can go hang out there and deep dive, and they don't have to log in. They don't have to give us our email address, none of that. They can retweet, reshare in the most open way possible. And most of the communications I get from people interested in Equality Archive are people trying to sell me something because they see a way to monetize. And it's not something that I want to do with that. If someone wanted to contribute to Equality Archive, they could just send me their entry, a title, catchy title, about 600 words with links, reliable, live, responsible links, and a name, and they can join the collective. Everyone's welcome. If they can create a piece of information that's useful, it fits inside of the web that is Equality Archive. So, I'm looking, I'm like, oh gosh, when I have a moment, I can't believe there's no Fannie Lou Hamer entry in Equality Archive. It's killing me when I think about it. There's all these holes in terms of entries and stories and themes and ideas. And it used to be that I would literally find somebody and write them and say, hey, could you do this? And I have this style sheet that I could send you. If someone wanted to contribute to Equality Archive, they could just write me. They could tweet at me. They could write me through Equality Archive. And I'll send them a style sheet, and they can have their class do it. In the beginning, there are quite a few people who would use it as a teaching tool and say, oh, I'll have my class write these entries. And then the class would write these entries, and whoever is writing would think it was really smart to write 2,000 words in very deep academic language. But this is the web. 600 words is what we're writing. Accessible language. And then when someone sends me 2,000 words and I have to edit it, I might as well have just written it myself.
Yes, we appreciate that. We'll actually, with all our guests, for all this kind of relevant information, we are sure to add that, attach the links and social media handles, all that kind of stuff to the description of this episode. So for all our listeners, definitely look at the description and click on all of Shelley's information to the websites and stuff like that to make it easy for you to go ahead and follow her work and check out the website and all that wonderful stuff.
I'm excited this is my first podcast, and I'm really excited about the two of you because you're also creating this alternative knowledge archives, right? With a podcast and with a digital platform like you're doing. I mean, this is changing it. This is changing access and opportunity. And this is what we have to do. And I'm excited to be here with you for the same reasons. I appreciate that you you like Equality Archive, and I really like this podcast. I really like that the two of you have come together to make something that's public and accessible.
Well, we appreciate that 100%. We definitely do. And like we said, we appreciate you taking the time to come talk with us today and sharing that knowledge, dropping those gems. And more importantly, we just appreciate, you for who you are and as a person. So thank you for coming in and talk with us today. And be sure to click on those links, everyone, and follow Shelley and all the wonderful work she's doing. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you're interested in continuing this and other conversations, visit our website, blackandhighlydangerous.com, to subscribe to our email list, suggest topics, and participate in our discussion forums.
Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at BHD Podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe and rate our podcast on your favorite platform. And as always, continue to be the oppressor's worst fear.